Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman will join us shortly. Here's what we're looking at.
Propose it to the people, let them vote on it.
It's now up to the state's high court to decide whether Illinois can abolish cash bail. Officials push Taste of Chicago to September to accommodate NASCAR street races. We talk park access and priorities.
I do not want to taint drinking water for millions of individuals.
A potentially dangerous coal byproduct near Lake Michigan. Is drinking water at risk? And mayoral candidate Paul Vallis's plan to boost development takes a page from Mayor Lori Lightfoot. And now to Brandis and our top story tonight.
Paris, the fate over whether cash bail will be eliminated in Illinois is now in the hands of the state's Supreme Court justices. Illinois was supposed to do away with cash bail at the start of 2023. It's a key part of a broader criminal justice overhaul passed by state lawmakers. Instead, just as it was set to go into effect, a Kankakee County court ruled that the pretrial bond provisions were unconstitutional. And today, the state's high court heard oral arguments on that case. Amanda Vinicky has been following this story. Amanda, tell us what this case is about.
Brandis, the lawsuit over cash bail pits the state's Democratic governor, attorney general, and legislative leaders against roughly half of Illinois' state's attorneys and some county sheriffs. And it's in the hands of, well, the 7 members of the Illinois Supreme Court. Both sides can agree on this much. The justice's decision on the case will have major ramifications on the future of the criminal justice system in Illinois. The plaintiffs fighting the law want the court to weigh 2 main arguments. One, that because the state constitution references bail, the legislature can't just abolish cash bail. That should require a constitutional amendment.
And they are free to set public policy, but on some occasions, such as in this instance, they have to take that to the vote of the people.
He points out that twice in the 80s, Illinois went to voters to approve questions regarding bail. Plaintiffs also say the General Assembly violated the separation of powers, meaning lawmakers can't unilaterally remove a tool like money bail from the judiciary's toolbox. The law also spells out when judges can detain an alleged offender pre-trial and forbids pre-trial detention for certain crimes.
The judiciary has an inherent judicial authority to set bail, to deny bail, to control the proceedings before it, because it is necessary to maintain the administrative functions of the court, to maintain an orderly process of criminal procedure.
So, Amanda, what did the state have to say in defense of the law?
They say that critics did not prove their case and that the Supreme Court should therefore reverse the lower court's decision, which would mean no more cash bail in Illinois. When it comes to the separation of powers issue, the Attorney General's office argues the plaintiffs are taking an expansive view of judicial power and too narrow a view of the legislature's scope.
The legislature is charged with making big decisions about the way that things should operate in the state. And that is the kind of fundamental point here. The legislature has made exactly that decision about the way that people should be treated while they are pending trial and presumed innocent. There is nothing in the Constitution that prohibits that decision.
The Deputy Solicitor General says legislators have a long history of setting public policy that governs what happens when a defendant is awaiting trial. And overturning the Safety Act would jeopardize years of law that serve as the scaffolding of Illinois sentencing procedures. Laws like mandatory minimum sentences.
It would grant plaintiffs an extraordinary windfall to find the statute facially unconstitutional and strike it down as to all parties in its entirety, just because there might be some hypothetical case in which a court would want to detain a low-level misdemeanant and lack statutory authority to do so.
Amanda, any inclination as to how this case will go?
Always hard to say, but the justices did have a lot of questions. Kankakee County State's Attorney Jim Rowe got out only a single sentence about why he brought this lawsuit before the Chief Justice interjected with a question. The Safety Act passed with only support from Democratic lawmakers, and the Supreme Court has 5 judges who ran as Democrats, only 2 who ran as Republicans. Brandis, the court took this case on an expedited basis, but didn't give any indication today as to when an opinion should be expected.
Watch and wait, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now back to Paris and some more of today's top stories.
Brandis, jury selection is underway in the trial of the so-called ComEd 4. Ex-City Club President Jay Doherty, retired ComEd executive John Hooker, former ComEd lobbyist Mike McLean, and former ComEd CEO Ann Pramaggiore all face federal bribery charges. Prosecutors allege the bribes were paid to allies of former House Speaker Mike Madigan in return for his support of favorable legislation. A little more than 60 potential jurors are left over right now after dozens were questioned today by prosecution and defense attorneys. More on this story on our website. People who work for human service nonprofits might soon find it easier to unionize. The Chicago Human Service Workforce Advancement Ordinance passed through a joint vote of 2 committees today. It would require human service organizations that contract with the city to allow employees to organize a union as long as those same workers agree not to disrupt company operations while organizing. Supporters argue unionization would allow workers who provide critical services like mental health care more agency in how those services are provided. But a coalition of 44 of the city's largest human service providers oppose the measure. They argue it would hurt their ability to stretch limited budgets to meet growing demand. And there's more on this story on our website as well. Road rage is on the rise in Illinois. Illinois State Police say road rage was reported in about 40% of expressway shootings the agency handled in 2022. That's up 12% in 2021. What's more, state police say it's already been reported in at least 9 Chicago area expressway shootings this year, even though expressway shootings have decreased overall since 2021. That's in addition to other road rage associated incidents like crashes and physical fights. ISP advises drivers to be on the lookout for aggressive drivers and to keep your distance to avoid being a victim. A chaotic day for many CTA train riders today. Brown, green, orange, and pink line trains experienced major delays downtown late this afternoon because the system lost power near Clark and Lake. At one point, firefighters had to help evacuate stranded passengers on the Brown line who were over the bridge over the Chicago River near the Merchandise Mart station. Basically, they had to walk the catwalk over that bridge to get to the station. According to the Chicago Fire Department, they rescued dozens and dozens of riders, and service was back to normal on all but the Brown line. One rider told us that they were stranded more than 2 hours until the fire department came and took them to rescue. And still this evening, according to the CTA website, the Brown line is experiencing service delays and only operating between Kimball and Armitage. And up next, Grant Park closures this summer are causing quite a stir. We dive into the debate right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
How do you feel about this, Chicago? You'll only have free access to all or part of Grant Park for 4 days out of 87 total this summer. That's because the park will be closed for a myriad of events, including the first ever NASCAR race, Lollapalooza, plus all the setup and teardown time for those events. And the Taste of Chicago will now likely be moved to a weekend in September. All that begs the question, who exactly are the parks for? And here to share their thoughts are Mark Schulman, president of Eli's Cheesecake, a longtime participant in Taste of Chicago, Juanita Irizarry, executive director of Friends of the Parks, and Leslie Recht, president of the Grant Park Advisory Council. We also invited representatives from the city, the mayor's office, NASCAR, and the city's tourism bureau, Choose Chicago. They all declined. Alderman Brendan Riley, whose 42nd ward includes parts of Grant Park, had been confirmed, but this afternoon he canceled. But we do thank all of you for being here today. Starting with you, Mark, you and Eli's Cheesecake have been there from the very beginning at Taste of Chicago. How do you and the other vendors feel about moving this to September now?
Well, we've been in Taste since 1980, 43 years. We had a year of no taste. We've had 10 days, 3 days, 1 day. We had a great taste last year around Buckingham Fountain. I think we really do believe it's great to do it in Grant Park. and we'll adjust to a little later in the year. But really excited after not having a taste in 20 and 21. It was great to be back in 2022.
And albeit smaller, and this one will be smaller too. It used to be as long as 10 days, now just over a weekend. Juanita Irizarry, is this the right solution to this log jam? We're going to have NASCAR and the Taste on the same weekend. Now Taste will just be in September.
I think it makes sense to not try to do it all at the same time downtown. I do think, however, all of it has been decided and communicated to the public so quickly and without a lot of transparency that we don't know enough to even know what problems may still exist. Some of the Taste activities are going out to neighborhood parks. That might be a good thing, but we're not sure that the folks in those communities who may have had other events already scheduled in that park have been coordinated with.
Leslie, as someone that's very involved in Grant Park, and there are 100,000 residents that use it as their park, how do you feel about this?
Well, we think Taste is a wonderful activity, and we've always supported it. One of the problems with moving Taste to the weekend that was chosen, the Grant Park Advisory Council had a fundraiser planned for that weekend. The Park District doesn't put capital money into Grant Park, hasn't for years, and we were trying to raise some funding for Grant Park. So again, these last-minute decisions with no coordination is really a problem for everybody involved.
Mark, does it affect the business for restaurateurs that do rely on this event to drum up some kind of publicity if it's held in September versus the summer?
You know, it used to be over the 4th of July. It started on July 4th. You had the big fireworks show. Then it was moved the week later. We'll see. You know, is it a great weather weekend? You know, September in Chicago can really be beautiful. You know, students are back in school, so I think we'll find out. But you know, hey, being in Grant Park, be there next to our friend Charlie Robinson. Really, you know, look forward to it. And again,
is this of Robinson's Ribs?
Yes,
of Oak Park, the great Robinson's Ribs.
Yes, and a great partner and friend of ours. So I think it's something we look forward to. Again, it's how we spend our summer now. It's how we're going to spend our early fall.
All right, Juanita Irizarry, to the bigger issue. As we mentioned, 83 out of 87 days, the park, which is supposed to be for the public, will not be accessible, all or parts of it, to the public for free. How are Chicagoans supposed to feel about that?
I think most of us are pretty frustrated. You know, there are some folks who can afford the high-priced tickets for some of these events who will certainly enjoy themselves. But lots of us will be priced out of use of our park. And we think parks should be democratic spaces. It shouldn't cost a lot of money to use them. And there should be times when everything isn't gated off. So we think it's a real problem for those coming downtown to have a good time, but also for the residents who expect a place to walk their dog and just, you know, enjoy a Saturday afternoon.
And Leslie, as we mentioned, there's this first ever contract with NASCAR, which could take all or parts of the park out for 40 days. And then there's Lollapalooza. It's weeks of setup and takedown time. Is this what Grant Park is supposed to be used for?
I think that the lack of transparency and the lack of input is really the issue, and that NASCAR was kind of foisted on us, and the 10-year contract with Lollapalooza was something that was signed without any consultation. But the key is that people are, I think, very concerned about how NASCAR is going to function. They're concerned about the safety. They're concerned about how much of the park and Lakeshore Drive are going to be closed off for this event. And so we have yet to see how this is going to work out. Certainly it's going to keep the park inaccessible for a very long period of time.
Juanita, what about for the residents that say, hey, we never asked for this. These deals just keep coming in the dead of night. The mayor seems to make them without consulting anybody. What recourse do they have?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people have called Friends of the Parks and said, why don't you sue? And the problem is not everything has a legal remedy, right? There's not a public trust doctrine that says you can't have a paid activity in Grant Park. So it's really up to us residents to push back through the media, through our elected officials to say, wait a minute, we think there needs to be maybe a more thoughtful process to balance the various needs of our parks and our communities.
Mark, I know you're concerned with the taste. You're concerned with Eli's. Do you want to weigh in? Any thoughts on that and the closures of these parks for so long?
Well, I think, you know, we're great users of the parks and in other parks. You know, you want to make it great. I think the great thing about Taste it's free and it's accessible, and you really want to be able to do that and minimize what's tied up. So, we'll look forward to a great summer, and I think by people speaking up and asking, hey, where's taste? I think the great thing is we have a great taste because everybody said we want it. So if it's in July or it's in September, it'll be a great year.
Juanita, there's been some talk about this, but the Bears might leave Soldier Field. I think more than might leave Soldier Field. They're probably going to leave Soldier Field. What about the use of that space and the parking lots there as a permanent space to have these kinds of big festivals? Would that be a good solution?
Yeah, Friends of the Parks does think that this is a real opportunity for the Park District and for Chicago to think about which concerts and events that are currently taking up other park space could go into the interior of Soldier Field.
You have Riot Fest in Douglas Park,
Right.
You've got Pitchfork in Union Park, neighborhood parks.
Right, and some of them need multiple stages, but there are parking lots and spaces around Soldier Field that could help accommodate some of those big festivals as well.
Leslie, is there some concern here that this park, again, meant for the public use, is slowly becoming privatized? These are big events that make lots of money, although what they'll say is this makes money for the city, too, in tax revenue. Is there a balancing act here?
There's definitely should be a balancing act, but the balance isn't being kept. Downtown, there are over 110,000 residents right now, and it's growing. And Grant Park is the neighborhood park for people who live downtown. And we've got students, we've got seniors, we've got children. There are a lot of people who use Grant Park for all kinds of park activities. And the problem in my mind is if you don't balance the needs, neighborhood needs versus the citywide needs, and put money back into Grant Park to repair it, you don't have a balance, and that's the way it is right now.
All right, this is an ongoing discussion. We'll see how the taste turns out in September and how people feel about not being able to use their park for a lot of this summer. And boy, we hope summer gets here fast. Our thanks to Mark Schulman, Juanita Irizarry, and Leslie Reck. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, burning coal for power creates a byproduct called coal ash, kind of like the residue left behind when you burn charcoal in a grill. Coal ash contains potentially dangerous material like arsenic, mercury, and cadmium that can endanger nearby water supplies. That's why some state lawmakers want to force the owner of a decommissioned generating station on the shores of Lake Michigan to clean up all the coal ash left behind. As Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg reports, that effort comes as federal regulators are also eyeing tougher rules.
Coal-fired power plants use a lot of water to keep their equipment cool. That's why they're often near bodies of water like Lake Michigan.
The last thing that we want to do is have a catastrophe on our lakefront that's going to impact the drinking water of 6.5 million people.
For years, Dulce Ortiz and other organizers with Clean Power Lake County fought to close Midwest Generation's power plant in Waukegan. Now, they're fighting to get the company to clean up all the coal ash left behind.
They want to remove the coal ash from one of the ponds, and they want to leave one to cap it in place. I feel like it's kind of like leaving a ticking time bomb there.
Those coal ash ponds are on the south end of the property, just a few hundred feet from Lake Michigan. Midwest Generation's owner, NRG, only wants to address the two ponds. Advocates note there's also a landfill on site.
I want to be proactive, not reactive.
State Representative Rita Mayfield is sponsoring a bill that would force NRG to remove all the coal ash from its Waukegan facility, which it's not currently required to do.
Now that they're being asked to remediate these ponds, there's like, oh, well, we can't do it, the sky is falling. It's not that you can't do it, it's that you don't want to do it.
In a statement to WTTW News, plant owner NRG defends its plans to cap one pond and remove the ash from another. Quote, contrary to a misinformation campaign driven by a small but vocal group who do not trust the regulatory process, MWG's plan is scientifically and historically proven to be a safe, sound, and effective way to protect groundwater in Waukegan for generations to come.
There are other coal ash sites along Lake Michigan that have been closed by capping in place, and there's been no issues with that.
Donovan Griffith is with the Illinois Manufacturers Association, which argues coal ash regulation should be handled by the state EPA, not lawmakers.
They can determine that it can be capped and the coal ash can remain in place, and the Illinois EPA can determine that the coal ash needs to be removed. But they are the experts that should make that determination, not the members of the Illinois General Assembly.
The Illinois Environmental Regulatory Group agrees, telling WTTW News lawmakers should let a coal ash law passed 2 years ago play out. Quote, regulations are still in development and the existing regulations have not been in place long enough to assess their effectiveness. It's not just action at the state level that's possible. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is considering tightening its regulations on coal ash landfills. Federal rules don't mandate cleanup of sites that stopped receiving the byproduct before 2015, when the current regulation went into place. Jennifer Castle is a senior attorney with Earth Justice. That organization did a study of coal ash left behind across the U.S.
It looks to us like there's about 500 million tons of coal ash in those inactive landfills around the country.
That's why Earth Justice led a lawsuit against the EPA aimed at forcing them to regulate all coal ash landfills. Castle says the carcinogenic and neurotoxic material in the ash can seep into groundwater and that many ponds and landfills may not be structurally sound.
We think that the evidence is going to be clear that those things do pose a risk to health, to the environment, and desperately need to be regulated.
For Dulce Ortiz, more action at the state level is critical for places like Waukegan, which is already home to 5 EPA-designated Superfund sites contaminated with hazardous material.
We dealt with a lot of industry that have made their profits and left their mess behind. We just want to have a beautiful community to thrive in.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
The Waukegan bill has cleared a House committee. If it's passed by the full House, it heads to the state Senate. As for the EPA's potential rule change on legacy coal ash landfills, a public comment period just ended. The agency is set to announce its decision by early May. Up next, how does one of the candidates for mayor plan to boost development in Chicago? Heather Sharon with that story right after a look at the weather.
Crime and public safety aren't the only issues facing Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson in the race for Chicago mayor. Both candidates also face questions about how they would boost development on the south and west sides. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now for a look at Vallas's plan, which takes a page from soon-to-be former mayor Lori Lightfoot. All right, Heather, Vallas and Johnson say they want to continue direct investments to the south and west side. Vallas says he's going to take a much different approach than Johnson. What is that different approach?
Vallas has proposed creating an independent community development authority, and he says that that agency will operate free of politics from the fifth floor, that's the mayor's office, and aldermanic prerogative, which of course is the unwritten rule that gives every alderperson the final say on what happens in that ward. Now, even though his economic development plan runs nearly 1,500 words, it's not quite clear how this body would work, what authority it would have, and how much money it would cost to staff up a whole new city agency. The Vallas campaign did not respond to our requests for additional information.
Right. Typically with these kinds of boards, if the mayor is appointing the board members, the mayor still kind of de facto has control over it. So why does Vallas think that this new approach is needed?
Well, he acknowledges the South and the West Side have endured decades of disinvestment, and he says that this body will leverage the city's resources, and not just its annual budget, but the sister agency budgets and its ability to borrow to really make a difference in communities where there are very many vacant land, and of course that contributes to crime and traps families in generations of poverty.
All right, so this kind of gets at the whole issue of aldermanic prerogative, where if there's a development in a certain ward, that alderman usually has the final say, and all other council members defer to that alderman. Lightfoot promised to end that in her campaign and in her tenure as mayor. We know how that kind of soured relationships. So what kind of support is there for something like this with Paul Vallas, an end to aldermen having the final say on this?
So there's very little appetite on the city council to tackle this hot button issue again. It's really hard to overstate how bruising these battles were on the city council. And there's a reason why Lori Lightfoot will leave office with aldermanic prerogative intact, if a little weakened.
So if Vallas has pushed the scale back, aldermanic prerogative falters, what happens to this issue for whoever the next mayor is?
Well, the biggest threat to aldermanic prerogative is likely an ongoing federal probe, which stems from a 2018 complaint from community groups who said that this practice really prevents affordable housing from being built in white areas of the city. And that could trigger an action by the Housing and Urban Development Department, but we'll have to wait and see.
All right, Heather Cherone, just one of the many hot-button issues that you are following in this race. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 10. With the runoff election just weeks away, how might Chicago's next mayor handle policing and public safety?
Plus, it's the ultimate and permanent form of self-expression, an up-close look at the art of tattooing. No tattoos for me.
Not today, anyway.
Not today or ever. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for joining us. Have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.
Next time.
He swore he'd kill us all for testifying.
After a violent man is released from prison.
I just want to live a normal life, Father.
He's killed.
Looks like he was shot at close range.
And Sid's longtime friend.
You haven't changed.
Is accused of the crime.
So what are you saying, that I should hang for Finbar's murder?
And it's down to you, Father. You've got to prove she's innocent.
But Father Brown fears more people will die.
We need to get back.
Father Brown.
Thursday at 8:30 on WTTW.
You're all very welcome to this evening's very special celebration of Ireland's road to freedom as told through the songs of her people. By the rising